My wife, F31, and I, M33, like many other Americans, are beleaguered under the for-profit medical insurance industry. My wife gave birth to our precious first daughter in September of 2021, and we've been dealing with taking the little one to the doctor, already had an emergency room visit, yay! And whatnot when we received the bill for the L&D at the hospital from September. We were charged over $20,000 for a straightforward, regular delivery with an epidural. Even though I do not like our insurance, it covered a huge chunk of the amount due. That being said, there were still over $2,000 left. Well, with my wife being a teacher and myself being a state government worker, our income isn't exactly low, but neither is it high either. $2,000 out of pocket would put us into major debt. The hospital was very patient at first with trying to get paid until recently. I had been in communication with the hospital trying to negotiate the cheapest amount possible to clear the account. The hospital still wanted to close to half of the amount in order to close the account out. I countered with what we could legitimately offer and consigned myself to the addition of yet another auto debit coming out of our bank account because they weren't going to accept my offer. But then the account representative kept interrupting me during the phone call and was being outrageously rude. I understand that we have a debt and I'm not trying to welch on it, but don't treat me like dirt because of this piss poor system that was charging my wife over $50 for one friggin' Advil amongst other insanity. The account representative continued being nasty during the call and derisively suggested maybe I should go to the financial assistance program, so I did. I called the customer service line for that said program, and in less than 10 minutes I was getting confirmation of the entire amount being forgiven. Apparently, when you make less than 300%, my apologies, I previously had a multiplication sign when I meant percentage, the federal poverty rate, and you go to most nonprofit hospitals, they will forgive the amount. The arrogant account representative tried to shame me into paying an outrageous price for services rendered and didn't want to accept my offer of paying some of the bill. So now they get absolutely nothing. Don't accept the medical bills that you receive, fight tooth and nail to get it down. And if you're lucky like my wife and I, you may just get it cleared all way. A couple years back, my wife and I had our son. We opted for paying out of the pocket instead of insurance because our deductible alone was larger than the out-of-pocket discount. It came out to about $6,000. About a month after he was born, we got the bill in the mail with instructions on how to set up a payment plan online. This was a very large chain of hospitals, so they realized they had everything streamlined to set up your auto billing. We realized while doing the setup that they allowed you to pick your date of starting. I decided to be a smartass and set the start date for January of 2060. Turns out they didn't have a cap for the start of payments, so we only had to pay the first month payment and be free from the rest until we are well into our 60s. My wife had to get an MRI many years ago. Hospital said they checked insurance and it didn't need pre-authorization. So she got the MRI. A few months later, we got a bill for nearly $7,000. We ignored it, but the insurance was supposed to cover it. We kept getting the bill every month for years. The hospital argued that we owed it because the insurance wouldn't pay, but the hospital had told us that it was okay beforehand. I think they knew they didn't have a case because it never got sent to collections, and they finally stopped mailing us a bill after 6 or 7 years. I have a good job with good medical insurance. First child is born, hospital sends a bill for about $6,000. I looked at my insurance EOB page and they paid out $20,000 or so. I ignored the hospital bill and intentionally let it go to collections. I sent the collection agency a cease and desist letter immediately. Google it if you need to. Never heard about this bill again. Credit report is also spotless. Source, I've been a professional debt collector for the last 10 years. Next story. When I transitioned out of the military, I naturally went back down to my home state. This meant I had a lot of adulting to set up with my new life. So I get up early one morning and start knocking things out on my to-do list. License renewal, medical stuff, change of address, etc, etc. Due to this, I was rolling around town with every scrap of paperwork about me in existence. Well, the day's going great and I'm down to my last task. Registering my car with the tag office, I pull up to the place with 30 minutes to spare, grab the few necessary documents, I googled the process before and knew exactly what I would need, and head inside. There are only 2 others in line and I'm at the counter in no time. I explained to the lady at the counter that I'm transferring my car back to my home state and I'm looking to get a veteran's tag. She, kind of rudely might I add, tells me how much it costs, but their card reader is down and I need exact change in cash. She then tells me where an ATM is. It's about a 10-minute walk and still wouldn't give the exact change I needed. Not having cash on hand, I shrug and walk out the door. I get 2 steps out and remember, this type of transaction is free for veterans in my state. I walk right back in and explain this. She starts the process but appears very agitated. We get to the part where she starts asking for documents and I start providing. After seeing everything I have, she starts claiming my proof of residence isn't enough and I need at least 2 different utility bills and the cable bill I had in my hand wouldn't work, which was total BS. At this point, I figure out what she's trying to do. She just doesn't want to deal with me and is trying to run the clock down until they close by giving me an arbitrary demands for paperwork I shouldn't be able to dig up in the next 20 minutes. Very well, I respond. Cue malicious compliance. I walk back to my car, grab my file full of neatly organized documents and spend the next 5 minutes shuffling them like playing cards. Wait till 5 minutes before they close and walk back in. Accordion folder of chaos in hand, I slowly walk up to her counter yet again. She's not happy to see me back. I set my folder on the counter to ask, "What were those documents you needed?" She tells me but tries to double down and names off more stuff this time. Bad idea on her part. I start thumbing through my folder as slowly as I possibly can, going from A to Z, flipping past every piece of paper in this thing, removing documents as I find them and start organizing them into sections on the countertop. It took forever. Once finished, I slowly and carefully explain each section. So over here, you have 2 months worth of cable bills, a power bill, water bill, phone bill with associated receipts for payments rendered. Here you have my birth certificate, social security card, 2 separate passports, state-issued ID and driver's license. That's followed by original discharge papers, military ID, and a copy of my original orders. Now here's my leasing agreement for my apartment along with 4 money orders and receipts for the past 4 months and years rent paid. Lastly, over here we have a bill of sale for my car, proof of insurance, 5 years worth of vehicle registrations, and vehicle title. Is there anything I've missed? Without a word, she starts banging away at her keyboard. A minute later, asks me what type of license plate I want. I told her the one I was getting was supposed to display an award I received while in the military. She smugly tells me I need proof I earned said award. Cue 5 more minutes of slowly digging through paperwork. I pull out the completely unnecessary award sheet and then point out it's also listed on my discharge paperwork already in her hand. 5 minutes spent updating my info in the system without even looking at the paperwork I provided, and I left with a brand new tag in hand 30 minutes after they were supposed to have closed. I still laugh about it to this day. People like her are why most people hate going to the DMV. Thankfully, when I moved from NY to Texas and needed to transfer everything, it was simple. I literally gave them a copy of my current registration, the vehicle inspection that I got done in Texas. It's different than New York where you can get a registration for multiple years, but the inspection is a different sticker for your vehicle, and my driver's license. When she saw I wanted a specialty plate and which one I had selected, she asked for my DD214, which I gave to her. It took me less than 10 minutes from the time I entered the DMV to the time I was walking out with my temporary tag until my new plates were mailed to me. That kind of service made my day, and I made sure to thank them. Next time, offer the hospital 10% of the outstanding bill. That is if you're willing to pay them anything. If they decline, tell them you want a utilization review. Recommend researching it for your state to make sure you don't break any laws. What that does is trigger an investigation by a neural third party at their expense, which compares the billed services against actual services rendered. It will knock down the $30 bill for 2 Advil down to a more reasonable price among other billed services. You can do this yourself if you're inclined, or you can pay up front if you know it's going to be a routine procedure. Most hospitals would charge less than 10% of what you were charged for L&D. Take for what it's worth. Excellent advice. I don't have prescription coverage and I'm on very many expensive medications. I've learned that most pharmaceutical companies have assistance programs you can apply for. I now get my expensive medications for free, which in turn saves me from being about $1,000, $365 in prescription costs each month, and prevents me from being homeless or starving. Next story. While in college, I had a summer job in a place that fabricated steel tubing. I was part of a 2-man team that packed the finished goods into boxes for shipment. To get them from our workstation to the loading dock, there was a heavy-duty hoist that rode on a monorail on the ceiling. To control it, there was a plastic switch box hanging from a cable. It was an old and took a lot of abuse. About once a week, the switch would stop working. My coworker was a guy named Dave who studied electrical engineering. We got along pretty well and had developed a system for when the hoist didn't work. I would walk across the shop to the electrical panel, flip the breaker that controlled the hoist, and let out a loud whistle. He would open up the switch box, clean out all the crud, make sure the wires were connected, reassemble the box, then whistle. That was my signal to reset the breaker and get back to work. One day, we were very busy processing a big order from an important customer. Our foreman Harry, who resented the college kids who worked there, was running around yelling at everyone to work faster and get off our forking butts. And of course, he was right by me when the hoist stopped. I took off for the breaker panel while Dave fetched the screwdriver. Harry started screaming, "Where the fork are you going? We have to get the forking hoist fixed." Ever notice that some people use fork and its derivatives as some sort of verbal punctuation? I told him I was gonna flip the breaker while Dave fixed the switch. He told me we can't afford to wait all day for me to walk across the forking shop and fork around with a forking breaker. He turned to Dave and just said, "Just fix the forking switch." Dave said he would do that as soon as the power was off, but as long as the power was on, he wasn't going anywhere near it. Harry started ranting about the forking college kids he had to deal with and forking pussies who think they know so much. It was his job to show us how things work in the forking real world. Dave and I just stood there pretty much ignoring him. We knew that there wasn't much he could do, and neither of us was going to risk an injury for $2.36 an hour. When Harry finally realized that we weren't going to fold, he told Dave to give him the screwdriver. I asked him if he was sure he didn't want me to cut the power. "Just give me the forking screwdriver." "Okay, you win." He got the cover off without incident, then started poking around inside the box. He triumphantly showed us that the forking wire had come off the forking screw, and you don't need a forking degree and electrical engine. Zap! The shock knocked him on his butt. The switch was fried and the tip of the screwdriver had a large divot. The general manager came running out of his office to see what the commotion was. By this time, Harry had recovered but had a nasty burn on his hand. The GM had another guy drive him to the ER. He told Dave and me to just hang out until he got the switch fixed, this time by a real electrician. That took most of the day. The GM asked if we could do him a favor and work late to get this order out. We agreed. A little OT is always welcome. It didn't take very long. It's funny how much better things run when you have an equipment that actually works and no foreman screaming at you. As we were punching out, GM thanked us and gave us each $50, and for the rest of the summer, Harry didn't fork with us. Years ago, when I worked at a supper club, one of the heat lamps would fail like clockwork at the same time nearly every day. I was tasked with trying to find the problem. As I was waiting for the lamps to heat up, Lester, one of the most disagreeable managers, came up and proudly stated, "Here's the problem." Grabbed a standard screwdriver from the counter. I had a shielded screwdriver in my hand. He was about to tighten one of the screws on top of the lamp socket. The other manager and I both shouted, "I wouldn't do that," followed by zap. He accidentally shorted the hot to the ground. Luckily, the circuit breaker did its job. He was startled but not injured. I quit soon after for a non-food service job. About a month later, he set the kitchen on fire. They stored the cash drawers in the microwave oven. When he closed the door, he forgot there was time left on the mechanical timer. He was fired shortly after. When it was found, he was the last one to use the microwave. I work in maintenance, and whenever there's an electrical work being done, I make damn sure that they follow the rules. If you can't see the breaker from where you're working, you put a lock on it. If it needs a screwdriver to access it, it's gonna be done by an electrician. No exemptions. A zap can kill even if the circuit breaker works. Next story. In college, I worked as a research assistant in a lab at a well-respected Midwest university. The job entailed lots of reading and computer work to design studies testing out various treatment options within the lab. The head of the department was a tenured curmudgeon who micromanaged everything down to how many and what color pens were kept. No outside pens, papers, highlighters were permitted in the department. It was odd, but I needed the research experience to get into medical school, so I just bit my tongue as it was only for a few months. Everything was fine until the last couple of weeks when I got a summer cold and carried a box of tissues around with me. The tissues were super soft and had lotion, so I obviously preferred them over the sandpaper El Cheapo department stock. Dr. Curmudgeon came through the department and did a double take. "You're not allowed to bring in any outside supplies from home. Of this, I've been very clear. We have tissues available. Use the provided supplies or fill out a department requisition form. Get rid of these." I had already finished my work for the summer and got accepted to another school, so I decided to teach Dr. Curmudgeon a little lesson. Now, I wish I could say this resulted in him getting fired or otherwise punished, but he was safe and I was tired of his terror on me. and the other staff. Most of them were Chinese and in the US on visas, so cue malicious compliance. My second to last day, I got a hold of departmental requisition form and ordered supplies. As directed, I spent $2,500 on the softest toilet paper, lotion to tissues, a little stock of candy bars, all new clipboard, sticky notes, the whole 9 yards. On my last day, while I was gathering my things, someone from Office Max came into the office to say the shipment had arrived and he needed help getting it upstairs. Shipment? Of what? Dr. Curmudgeon bellowed. Probably office supplies. I grinned and quietly slinked out to my car in the chaos of finding enough people to carry in $2,500 of unneeded stuff, courtesy of Dr. Curmudgeon's grant account. 5 years later, I ran into another person that interned through Dr. Curmudgeon's lab. I jokingly asked what kind of tissues they had, and she bemused, smiled, and said, "These really expensive lotioned ones actually. Some interns ordered enough to last 10 years worth, and they have a whole stock room of them." I just smiled. I think she figured it out, but I never asked to make sure. Don't bring supplies from home to use in the chemistry lab. Logical. Consistency is important. Don't bring supplies from home to use in the office. Fine, if it's so employees don't spend their own money on office supplies, but I wouldn't be strict about enforcing it. Bringing in your own day planner or favorite pen would be no worries. Don't bring your own hygiene supplies from home that you would have with you anyway. Absolutely freaking insane. Personal hygiene issues are over the top, but what office supplies can be used in a lab is strictly controlled. The FDA won't approve any drug that doesn't include an audit of what types of paper, pens, and tissues are used. As a lab manager, I had to a stationary audit once a year and do compliance training of scofflaws. For the record, the paper is numbered so bound Nalgene blotter, the pens are felt tip and solvent resistant, and the tissues are Kim wipes.